What is policy for? Or more specifically, what is social welfare policy for? I think if I asked most people why we have social welfare policies, they would say to help people, to fill a need, to relieve misery, to improve well-being. So I want to start by saying that this is sometimes a reason for creating social welfare policies or expanding existing programs, but it is almost never, if ever, the only reason, and maybe rarely even the principal reason. As a general rule, people with power tend not to care too much about poor people, or put more charitably, they care about other things more. So then, why do social welfare policies ever get enacted then if it's not out of moral obligation? Many policies are created for political gain or to mobilize voters. George Washington himself plied voters with whiskey to win early elections, having learned that lesson the hard way after having lost a previous one in which he refused to engage in such tactics. More recently, Social Security offers a fine example of what I mean here. So when the program was first created in 1935, it had low benefits and they weren't indexed to inflation. That is, they didn't automatically rise as they do now if the cost of living rises. So if benefits were going to go up, Congress had to pass a law. And if we look over the course of the 20th century, we can see a curious pattern. When do you think it is that laws raising benefit levels were most likely to be passed? Election years. Now, as I said, this is no longer the case, and benefits are now indexed to inflation. They rise automatically every year as the cost of things go up. And this change was signed into law by Richard Nixon. Now, do you think Nixon signed this bill because he was particularly worried about the well-being of poor, older Americans? I tend not to. But why then? Because he was, whatever else he was, a smart man and a clever politician. He saw that the Democrats, who were in control of Congress for much of the 20th century, were wooing voters during election years by increasing Social Security benefits. Nixon saw that he could take away that advantage if benefits went up automatically year after year after year, and he could stop the Democrats from taking credit for it. Now again, I'm not claiming that no one involved in these policy changes cared about poor older people. But what I am saying is that this may not have been the driving force, the principal cause. Now this is not to make you cynical, but to make you smart and savvy, to make you a critical student of U.S. social welfare policy so that you can be more effective in changing it in the future. You don't do yourself any favors if you are naive about how and why policy change happens. Let's talk about another motivation for creating or expanding relief programs. So let's imagine it's Europe in the Middle Ages and a famine has swept the land. The peasants, when things get so desperate that they feel they have no other option, gather together at the castle gates, often with torches, and demand food from the king. The threat, implicit or explicit, is that if he doesn't grant their demand, they will burn the castle down. These kind of food riots are actually pretty commonplace throughout lots of world history. So, in due course, the king commands one of his knights to go out to the granary, and sure enough, he distributes some flour or wheat or corn or whatever is at hand to the angry peasants. Does he do this because he's worried about their well-being, troubled to think of them as hungry? No, probably not. He does it for two reasons. One, to ensure his safety against rebellion and perhaps even violence, and second, to help maintain his legitimacy. Even a king or a military dictator understands that people will only be quiet for so long. They can be immiserated only so much before they rebel or lose faith in those who rule them. So too today, Do regimes expand relief during periods of crisis? Karl Polanyi is in an important book called The Great Transformation, noted that even conservatives thought that the old poor laws of Britain, which institutionalized cash aid, saved the country from revolution. Or think about the Great Depression in the US in this context, and how the emergency relief programs of the 1930s quieted an increasingly desperate public. Or think of the Great Society programs expanding in the wake of mass unemployment and riots in cities of the North. Relief, in this way of thinking, can be a way to keep a populace content enough that they do not rebel, that they don't expend energy trying to change the status quo. So this is very much aligned with Piven and Cloward's argument in a book called Regulating the Poor. As they write, relief arrangements are ancillary to economic arrangements. Their chief function is to regulate labor, and they do that in two general ways. First, when mass unemployment leads to outbreak of turmoil, relief programs are ordinarily initiated or expanded to absorb and control enough of the unemployed to restore order. Then, as turbulence subsides, the relief system contracts, expelling those who are needed to populate the labor market. So, to review. Social welfare policies are rarely the product of the simple desire to improve well-being. Often, the policymaking system is unconcerned with the needs of poor and low-income people, and a growing body of research demonstrate this pretty clearly. Policies more typically emerge or expand to solve other kinds of problems, to get votes or to preserve electoral legitimacy, to placate a potentially disruptive populace, and to regulate the low-wage labor market. And in the US, by the way, it is typically the cheapest available methods that are undertaken to achieve these goals.